Do you ever wonder what your great-grandparents were really eating? I'm not talking about the Thanksgiving turkey or the Sunday roast. I mean those strange, flavorful, and totally forgotten side dishes that filled the gaps on their plates. Before microwaves, before processed cheese, before calorie counting and low-fat fads, the side dishes in old American cookbooks were anything but boring. Today, we're opening up stained recipe cards, vintage handwritten notes, and dusty 100-year-old cookbooks to uncover 30 forgotten side dishes that once defined everyday eating across the US. Some of these dishes are delicious and deserve a comeback. Others, let's just say they're more historically interesting. And a few are so strange they're actually illegal to make today. So grab your virtual fork and prepare for a trip through culinary time. These are the 30 forgotten side dishes you could only find in old cookbooks. And trust me, you'll wish you knew them sooner. 1. Tomato aspic. Tomato aspic was the crown jewel of mid-century dinner parties, and while today it might seem like a culinary crime, it was once considered elegant and refined. Think of it as a savory, tomato-flavored gelatin mold. Yes, gelatin. But instead of being sweet and fruity, this one was filled with vegetables, seasonings, and sometimes even seafood or eggs. The core ingredients were tomato juice, unflavored gelatin, lemon juice, celery, onion, salt, and Worcestershire sauce. The liquid was simmered, strained, and combined with gelatin, then chilled until firm, often molded into fancy shapes and served with a dollop of mayonnaise or a ring of greens. Aspics were incredibly popular from the 1920s through the 1960s because they were visually striking and could be prepared in advance, perfect for hostesses trying to impress. They also represented a fascination with science and cooking, especially with how gelatin could trap food into sculptural forms. Despite its decline, tomato aspic offers a glimpse into a time when presentation, preservation, and novelty were more important than modern food norms. Love it or hate it, this dish is a nostalgic symbol of vintage American cuisine. And for the brave, it's an edible time capsule worth trying at least once. 2. Corn pudding? Creamy, golden, and lightly sweet. Corn pudding was a staple on tables throughout the South and Appalachian regions from the 1800s well into the mid-20th century. It's one of those magical side dishes that walks the line between savory and dessert, a custard-like blend of corn, milk, butter, and eggs that melts in your mouth. Old recipes, especially those found in handwritten church cookbooks or passed down through families, used fresh corn in summer and canned or dried corn in winter. A touch of sugar highlighted the corn's natural sweetness, while black pepper and sometimes a dash of nutmeg added savory complexity. It was typically baked until golden brown on top, forming a slightly crispy edge and a soft, spoonable center. Corn pudding was often served with ham, roast pork, or turkey, and it held a place of honor during holidays. It was economical, used simple ingredients, and made the most of a major American crop, corn. As boxed mixes and frozen sides began dominating store shelves in the 70s and 80s, corn pudding quietly fell off the radar. But those who remember it describe it as the ultimate comfort food, hearty, humble, and full of nostalgic flavor. Recreating it today is like reviving a piece of edible Americana. 3. Creamed chipped beef on toast, aka SOS. If you ask a veteran or anyone who grew up during the Depression or World War II, they'll likely remember creamed chipped beef on toast, lovingly or sarcastically called SOS, which stands for stuff on a shingle, though the actual phrase was a bit more colorful. This dish consists of thin slices of dried beef, rehydrated and cooked in a creamy white bechamel sauce made with butter, flour, and milk. The savory, salty mixture was then ladled generously over toasted white bread. It was simple, hearty, and dirt cheap, ideal for feeding soldiers, large families, and anyone on a budget. In military barracks and mess halls, this dish was served so frequently, it became a symbol of life during wartime. And yet, despite the nickname, many people developed a real taste for it, especially when homemade with fresh ingredients. The creamy sauce, rich with umami from the beef, paired beautifully with the crunch of toast. As food became more gourmet and health-conscious in the late 20th century, SOS lost its place on the table. But in vintage cookbooks and diners that celebrate Americana, this salty, creamy comfort food still makes the occasional appearance. And for some, it's a beloved taste of resilience. 4. Scalloped tomatoes. Before casseroles got cheesy and cream of mushroom heavy, scalloped tomatoes were the go-to baked dish in Depression-era kitchens. It was a brilliant way to use stale bread and overripe tomatoes, ingredients that would otherwise go to waste. The traditional recipe called for bread cubes, or crumbs, diced tomatoes, fresh or canned, onion, butter, sugar, salt, and pepper. Some versions included a bit of vinegar or bacon drippings for depth. Everything was layered or mixed together in a baking dish, topped with more breadcrumbs or butter, and baked until bubbly and golden. The result was a sweet, savory blend with a texture like tomato stuffing, crunchy on top, soft underneath. The sugar helped balance the acidity of the tomatoes, and the bread soaked up all the juices to create a dish that was rustic, rich, and incredibly satisfying. Scalloped tomatoes weren't just about flavor, they were about survival. They showed how creative home cooks were in stretching ingredients during hard times. Though the dish eventually faded in popularity as processed side dishes took over, it remains a quietly powerful tribute to culinary resourcefulness and a surprisingly delicious throwback for modern cooks to rediscover. 5. Parsnip fritters. Before potatoes took over America's root vegetable scene, parsnips were a star in early colonial and 19th century kitchens. These sweet, earthy roots were often grated, mixed with flour, egg, and seasonings, then pan-fried into crisp-edged fritters. Parsnip fritters were a winter staple, often served alongside roasts or stews. Their naturally sweet flavor intensified when cooked, and depending on the region, they were spiced with nutmeg, cinnamon, or black pepper. In some recipes, they leaned sweet, served with molasses or applesauce. In others, they were strictly savory, even paired with vinegar-based sauces. Cookbooks from the 1800s and early 1900s often featured parsnip fritters as a clever way to use up root-cellar vegetables. They were cheap, nutritious, and comforting. Over time, as carrots and potatoes became more common and industrial farming standardized crops, parsnips and their fritters quietly vanished from most tables. Today, they're a hidden gem waiting for revival. Crunchy on the outside, tender inside, and packed with flavor, parsnip fritters remind us that old-school vegetables still have a place in modern kitchens, especially when they come crispy and golden. 6. Carrot mold. Carrot mold is one of those dishes that exemplifies mid-20th century America's fascination with gelatin and with putting vegetables into molds. At first glance, it sounds like something out of a science experiment. Cooked carrots blended with gelatin, vinegar, sugar, and often other ingredients like pineapple, chopped celery, or even onion. The mixture was then poured into decorative molds, chilled until firm, and served cold on a bed of lettuce, usually with a spoonful of mayonnaise or sour cream on top. Popular in the 1930s through the 1960s, carrot mold was a go-to side dish for women's luncheons, potlucks, and holiday buffets. The bright orange color gave it visual appeal, and the tangy sweet flavor made it an unexpected but refreshing side to heavier meats like ham or turkey. While it might seem odd by modern standards, the dish was considered quite fashionable, even elegant, in its heyday. And thanks to its firm texture and vibrant color, it was a practical and presentable dish that could be prepared ahead of time and held its shape for hours on a buffet table. Today, carrot mold has all but disappeared from contemporary menus, and a reminder that food trends are always evolving. 7. Harvard beets. Harvard beets are a sweet and sour side dish that once graced dinner tables all over New England and beyond. Their name sounds fancy, but their origins are humble. The dish consists of cooked beets simmered in a sauce made from vinegar, sugar, butter, and sometimes a pinch of cloves or allspice. The sauce is thickened slightly, forming a shiny crimson glaze that coats the tender beet slices. Harvard beets gained popularity in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, especially in cookbooks focusing on regional American cuisine. Their tangy, sweet flavor made them a bright companion to hearty proteins like roast beef, pork chops, or meatloaf. And their rich color added visual flair to any plate. Some say the name Harvard came from a Boston restaurant where the dish originated, while others believe it was simply a nod to the crimson hue associated with the Ivy League University. Either way, they became a beloved staple of home cooks throughout the Northeast and Midwest. As fresh vegetables became more available and diverse, and as fewer people grew or canned their own beets, the dish faded in popularity. But Harvard beets remain a classic example of how regional American cooking combined practicality with creativity, turning simple ingredients into a striking side dish. 8. Mock oyster pie. Mock oyster pie is a testament to how creative and resourceful early American cooks could be, especially when expensive ingredients like oysters were out of reach. Found in cookbooks from the 1800s and early 1900s, this pie was made using eggplant, crushed crackers, milk, butter, and seasoning like Worcestershire sauce, black pepper, and sometimes a hint of nutmeg. The goal was to replicate the briny, meaty texture of oysters in a cost-effective, vegetarian-friendly way. The eggplant, when cooked down and seasoned, offered a tender, slightly spongy bite that mimicked shellfish surprisingly well. The addition of milk and butter gave the filling a creamy consistency, while the crackers bound it together. Baked in a pie shell and often topped with buttered crumbs or puff pastry, it came out golden, bubbling, and aromatic. This dish was especially common in inland communities where seafood was scarce or expensive. For some, it was a matter of affordability. For others, it was a practical adaptation to seasonal availability. Today, mock oyster pie is almost entirely forgotten, but it serves as a fascinating window into the ingenuity of old-fashioned cooks, people who could simulate coastal luxury in a farmhouse kitchen using humble pantry staples. 9. Celery Victor. In the early 1900s, long before kale salads and quinoa bowls, one of the most popular vegetable side dishes in upscale American restaurants was Celery Victor. Originating at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco, this elegant salad featured blanched celery hearts, marinated in a light broth-based vinaigrette with wine vinegar, olive oil, pepper, and sometimes beef consommé. The celery was served chilled, often garnished with pimentos, olives, or hard-boiled eggs. It was crisp, bright, and refreshingly savory, a refined counterbalance to rich meats and cream-heavy entrees. It became a signature of fine dining on the West Coast and was widely imitated in home kitchens and cookbooks for decades. What made Celery Victor so special was how it transformed a humble vegetable into a centerpiece-worthy dish. At a time when refrigeration was still a novelty, the cool temperature and light marinade made it a luxurious and modern-feeling side. Over time, as tastes shifted and salads became more elaborate, Celery Victor faded from menus, but it stands as a beautiful example of how early 20th century chefs were elevating vegetables long before plant-based became trendy. With a little creativity, even celery could be worthy of white tablecloth service. 10. Dandelion greens with bacon. Before kale was cool, dandelion greens were a springtime staple in rural America, especially in the Midwest and Appalachia. Families would forage for these bitter but nutrient-rich greens as soon as the snow melted and the plants began to emerge. The young leaves were tender and packed with vitamins, and they provided one of the first fresh foods after a long winter. The most beloved way to serve them? Sautéed or simmered in a skillet with hot bacon grease, a splash of vinegar, and crumbled bacon. Sometimes onions or hard-boiled eggs were added for texture. The heat tamed the bitterness of the greens, while the bacon and vinegar created a tangy, savory dressing that turned something wild and tough into something truly crave-worthy. In old cookbooks and farming almanacs, you'll often find recipes for hot bacon dressing, used specifically on dandelion salads. It was both a survival food and a delicacy, a reminder of the seasons and the joy of eating what the land offered naturally. As wild foods became less common in modern diets and store-bought greens took over, dandelion greens fell into obscurity, but they're still there, growing freely and offering a taste of the past for anyone curious enough to harvest them. 11. Sweet potato biscuits. These orange-hued biscuits were a southern staple from the 1800s through the early 1900s. By adding mashed sweet potatoes to a classic biscuit dough, cooks achieved a tender, fluffy texture with a subtle sweetness and a beautiful golden color. Traditional recipes called for nothing more than flour, baking powder, salt, fat, usually lard or butter, and mashed sweet potato, no sugar necessary. The natural sweetness of the potato shone through, making them equally suited for savory meals or breakfast spreads. They were often served with salty country ham, sausage gravy, or just a dollop of butter and honey. Sweet potato biscuits gained popularity due to their affordability and flavor. Sweet potatoes were easier to store and grew better in the South than white potatoes. Plus, they added moisture to baked goods, perfect for a time when refrigeration was limited. Over time, they were overshadowed by mass-produced white biscuits and canned varieties, but they still appear in older church cookbooks and family recipe boxes waiting to be rediscovered by modern bakers looking for comfort with a twist. 12. Corn oysters. Don't let the name fool you. Corn oysters contain no seafood. Instead, these were small, savory corn fritters, shaped and fried to resemble oysters in both texture and appearance. Originating in the 1800s, they became a meatless staple in vegetarian cookbooks and home kitchens, especially during times of fasting or rationing. The batter typically consisted of freshly grated or creamed corn, flour, eggs, and a bit of milk or cream. Seasoned lightly with salt, pepper, and sometimes a dash of cayenne, the mixture was dropped by spoonfuls into hot oil or butter and fried until crisp and golden. The fritters puffed slightly as they cooked, developing a tender, juicy interior and a crunchy exterior. Corn oysters were often served with lemon wedges or even cocktail sauce to play up the oyster effect. They were humorous, thrifty, and surprisingly delicious, a testament to how people made the most of humble ingredients. They faded from popularity with the rise of frozen corn and changes in American appetites. But as comfort food trends return, corn oysters offer a playful, flavorful bite from a simpler time. 13. Salsify au gratin. Sometimes called oyster plant for its faint shellfish-like flavor, salsify is a root vegetable that once enjoyed high status in both European and early American kitchens. Though rare today, it was a staple in many 19th century gardens and cookbooks. One of the most beloved ways to prepare it was au gratin. Thinly sliced salsify roots were boiled until tender, then layered in a buttered dish with a bechamel or cream sauce, grated cheese, and breadcrumbs. Baked until golden and bubbly, the result was a warm, comforting casserole with a subtle, nutty flavor and melt-in-your-mouth texture. Salsify au gratin was often served alongside poultry or veal, and it represented a refined use of vegetables during a time when meat was expensive and not always plentiful. Its decline is tied to both the difficulty in growing and cleaning salsify and its replacement by more common vegetables like potatoes or carrots. But for heirloom gardeners and curious cooks, this dish is a forgotten gem that deserves a second life. 14. Baked cucumbers. Yes, baked cucumbers were once a legitimate and even fashionable dish. While most of us know cucumbers as crisp, refreshing, and cold, early 20th century cookbooks offered recipes that called for slicing and baking them with herbs, onion, butter, and sometimes a bit of cream or cheese. The result was a mellow, tender vegetable with a flavor somewhere between zucchini and summer squash. When cooked, the cucumber loses its sharpness and takes on a soft, almost savory character. Baked cucumber casseroles were often served with roasted poultry or delicate fish, and offered a creative way to use an overabundance of garden produce. This dish faded as fresh salads gained popularity, and as cucumbers became synonymous with cold dishes. But its history offers a reminder that vegetables were once prepared in far more ways than we typically see today. 15. Stuffed onions. Stuffed onions were the unsung heroes of Victorian and early 20th century dinner parties. Cooks would take large, mild onions, hollow them out, and fill the centers with seasoned breadcrumbs, herbs, meat, rice, or cheese. Then bake them until the onions softened and the filling turned golden. The result was a savory, aromatic dish that paired beautifully with roasts or poultry. The onions served both as vessel and flavor booster, turning mellow and sweet as it baked. In some versions, the whole stuffed onion was topped with gravy or cheese for an extra indulgent touch. These dishes were elegant, economical, and deeply flavorful, but fell out of fashion as faster side dishes and convenience foods took over. Today, stuffed onions are ripe for rediscovery as a beautiful vintage side with serious flavor impact. 16. Water lily pickles. Water lily pickles are perhaps one of the most obscure, yet fascinating more entries in the world of forgotten American side dishes. Found primarily in early 20th century Appalachian and Southern cookbooks, this dish was made from young, tender water lily pods or rhizomes. These parts of the aquatic plant were cleaned, sliced, and then pickled using a combination of vinegar, sugar, cloves, and sometimes allspice or cinnamon. The resulting pickle was crisp, tangy, slightly floral, and utterly unique. In flavor, it resembled a cross between pickled okra and lotus root, offering both crunch and subtle sweetness. Often served on relish trays or alongside roast pork, it stood out as a local specialty in areas where water lilies grew naturally in marshlands, creeks, and swamps. The dish's popularity waned over time for several reasons. For one, foraging water lily parts correctly requires local knowledge and care, and in some states, wild harvesting is now restricted or regulated. Second, as home pickling declined and store-bought condiments became more accessible, people moved away from these labor-intensive practices. But water lily pickles remain a powerful symbol of regional resourcefulness and a culinary reminder of how deeply American cooking was once tied to local ecosystems and seasonal rhythms. 17. Jerusalem artichoke relish. Jerusalem artichokes, also known as sunchokes, were once a common crop in early American gardens due to their hardiness and nutty, slightly sweet flavor. Though the tuber has made a minor comeback among gourmet chefs, one of its most forgotten uses is in relish. Early 20th century cookbooks featured recipes for a tangy relish made from chopped Jerusalem artichokes, vinegar, mustard seed, onions, and sometimes red or green peppers. The raw or slightly cooked sunchokes gave the relish a crunchy texture, while the vinegar-based brine brought brightness and zing. It was often served with ham, sausages, or grilled poultry. This relish had all the qualities of a great side: tangy, crisp, colorful, and packed with fiber. It also stored well in jars, making it a frequent fixture in root cellars and on farmhouse tables. The Jerusalem artichoke's ability to grow in poor soil made it a dependable food source, and turning it into relish was a flavorful way to preserve it. As taste shifted towards sweeter condiments and more uniform products, this humble relish disappeared. but for fans of fermented and pickled vegetables, it's a lost treasure worth reviving. 18. Boiled peanuts. Boiled peanuts may still be known as a southern snack food, but few realize that they were originally served as a full-fledged side dish and that their history stretches back hundreds of years. Especially popular in Georgia, South Carolina, and Alabama, boiled peanuts were a seasonal delicacy made from freshly harvested green, raw peanuts. The peanuts were boiled for hours in salted water, sometimes with additions like ham hocks, Cajun spices, or bay leaves, until they became soft, tender, and soaked with flavor. Their texture became creamy and their shells easy to peel, almost like eating savory edamame. This salty, earthy dish was commonly served at cookouts, family dinners, and alongside cornbread, collard greens, or pulled pork. In the 1800s and early 1900s, boiled peanuts were a clever way to utilize perishable green peanuts that couldn't be dried or roasted in time. They also became an important social food, served at festivals, roadside stands, and church gatherings. Today, boiled peanuts are often seen as a quirky snack rather than a dinner side, but their deep roots in rural food culture and their unique taste make them one of the South's most enduring and misunderstood culinary traditions. 19. Curried fruit. Compote. One of the more surprising side dishes to emerge in mid-century cookbooks is curried fruit compote. A product of the 1950s and 60s, it reflects America's growing fascination with international flavors and the rise of pantry-friendly recipes using canned goods. This dish combined canned peaches, pears, pineapple, and sometimes cherries, all warmed gently in a skillet with butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, and the unexpected twist, a tablespoon or two of curry powder. The result was a fragrant, sweet and savory compote that was served warm as a side dish for baked ham, roasted turkey, or pork chops. The flavor combination was exotic for its time. The curry offered a mild, earthy heat that contrasted beautifully with the syrupy fruit. This side dish became a favorite at potlucks and holiday dinners, especially in the South and Midwest. As fresh fruits became more readily available and curry powder evolved into spicier blends, this dish faded into obscurity. But it remains an unforgettable example of post-war culinary creativity and how American cooks experimented with fusion cuisine long before it became a trend. 20. Pickled watermelon rind. Frugality often leads to innovation, and pickled watermelon rind is a perfect example. In early 20th century kitchens, especially across the South, thrifty home cooks looked for ways to use every part of a watermelon. The pink fruit was eaten fresh or turned into jelly, while the thick white rind, often discarded today, was peeled, cubed, and pickled into a tangy spice treat. The classic preparation involved simmering the rind in a brine of sugar, vinegar, cloves, cinnamon, and sometimes ginger. The result was a crunchy sweet pickle with just enough heat and spice to stand on its own, or complement rich, salty dishes like fried chicken or ham. Pickled watermelon rind was a staple on southern relish trays, especially during the summer months and holidays. It was also a smart way to preserve the summer bounty for use throughout the year. While it disappeared from many tables as canned and jarred condiments took over, it's recently enjoyed a small revival among chefs interested in sustainability and zero-waste cooking. Whether eaten alone or as part of a charcuterie board, this dish proves that even scraps can be turned into something remarkable. 21. Cottage cheese ring. A centerpiece of many 1950s and 60s luncheons, the cottage cheese ring was both a dish and a serving vessel. Made by combining cottage cheese with unflavored gelatin, mayonnaise, chopped pimentos, celery, onion, and seasonings, it was poured into a ring mold and chilled until firm. Once unmolded, the center would be filled with peas, shrimp salad, or even fruit. This dish served dual purposes: visual flair and functional plating. The bright colors, molded shape, and creamy texture made it a favorite for buffet tables and women's club gatherings. It also provided a cool, protein-packed side that was light yet satisfying. As gelatin salads fell out of favor in the late 20th century, the cottage cheese ring went with them. But it remains a fascinating relic of a time when presentation was everything, and when gelatin was a canvas for creativity. 22. Jellied chicken salad. Jellied chicken salad may sound like an odd concept today, but in the 1930s and 40s it was considered modern and sophisticated. The base of this side was a savory aspic made from chicken broth and gelatin, which was then combined with chopped cooked chicken, celery, pimentos, olives, and sometimes hard-boiled eggs. The mixture was poured into molds and chilled until firm, then sliced and served cold, often with crackers or crisp lettuce. It was a popular summer dish because it required no reheating, could be made ahead of time, and looked quite elegant when sliced. This dish was especially common during wartime rationing, when stretching meat was essential and refrigeration was still evolving. It was practical, nutritious, and easy to transport to potlucks or picnics. Though the idea of meat and gelatin is off-putting to many modern palates, jelly chicken salad was an early example of protein-forward, make-ahead meals, and a surprising peek into what was once considered gourmet. 23. Brown bread and raisin stuffing. Long before box stuffing mixes became a holiday staple, homemade versions dominated American kitchens, and brown bread and raisin stuffing was one of the most beloved. Popular in New England and inspired by colonial cooking, this side dish featured crumbled brown bread, often steamed or molasses-sweetened, chopped raisins, onions, and herbs like sage and thyme. The sweetness of the raisins played beautifully against the savoriness of the herbs, creating a rich, complex stuffing that was perfect for roasted poultry or pork. Sometimes sausage or oysters were added for even more depth. This dish was a staple during Thanksgiving and Christmas celebrations and was often cooked inside the bird or in a buttered casserole dish. Its deep molasses-based flavor profile made it stand out from the lighter bread stuffings more common today. While it has largely disappeared from modern holiday menus, brown bread and raisin stuffing offers a delicious alternative for anyone looking to add historical flair to their feast. 24. Turnip souffle. Elegant, airy, and unexpected, turnip souffle was once the star of Victorian dinner tables and early 20th century cookbooks. The dish began with boiled turnips mashed until smooth, then mixed with egg yolks, butter, salt, pepper, and sometimes grated cheese. Whipped egg whites were folded in gently to give the souffle lift and a delicate texture. When baked, it puffed beautifully, golden on top, fluffy and creamy inside. It was typically served as a vegetable side to roasts, lamb, or baked fish. Turnip souffle allowed cooks to elevate a humble root vegetable into something refined and special. Turnips were inexpensive and easy to grow, but their strong flavor made them less appealing to children and picky eaters. The souffle format softened the bitterness and added richness and sophistication. As cooking styles shifted towards speed and convenience, souffles of all types declined in home kitchens. But this dish stands as proof that vegetables were once given center stage and treated with the same care as a roast or pie. 25. Apple onion gratin. This savory sweet side dish originated from Pennsylvania Dutch and early American colonial cooking. Apple onion gratin layered sliced tart apples and sweet yellow onions in a casserole dish, often with breadcrumbs, butter, and sometimes cream or sharp cheese. Baked until golden and caramelized, it was a perfect pairing for pork chops, sausages, or roast duck. The sweetness of the apple balanced the richness of the onion, while the crispy topping provided contrast. In a time when fresh produce was seasonal and food waste was discouraged, this dish helped make the most of simple ingredients. While it's been overshadowed by more modern gratins featuring potatoes or squash, apple onion gratin offers a rustic, hearty flavor profile that's both comforting and surprisingly complex. 26. Rice and celery. Casserole rice and celery. Casserole was a staple during the Great Depression and World War II, when cooks had to stretch ingredients to feed large families. It sounds simple, and it is, but that's exactly what made it so beloved. The base was cooked white rice combined with sautéed celery and onions, mixed with a basic white sauce or cream soup, and baked until hot and slightly golden on top. Sometimes it included grated cheese or a topping of buttered breadcrumbs for extra flavor. The celery added crunch and freshness, while the rice provided a neutral, comforting foundation. This dish was often paired with leftover meat, particularly chicken or turkey, but it was also served on its own as a budget-friendly side or vegetarian main. It was especially popular in community and church cookbooks throughout the 1940s and 50s, where home cooks shared recipes that were economical and crowd-pleasing. As processed rice products and instant meals gained popularity, this humble casserole slowly faded from tables, but not from memory. Today, rice and celery casserole is a beautiful example of Depression-era ingenuity, a satisfying dish made from basic pantry staples, elevated through simplicity and heart. 27. Savory bread. Custard. Savory bread. Custard is the lesser-known cousin of bread pudding, a cozy, flavorful dish once common in colonial and early American kitchens. It was a clever way to use stale bread by combining it with milk, eggs, onions, herbs, and sometimes cheese, bacon, or leftover vegetables. The mixture was poured into a baking dish and baked until golden and set, forming a soft, custardy interior with a slightly crispy top. The beauty of this dish was its versatility. It could be served as a side dish or even as a light main course. Some versions leaned heavily into cheese and herbs for a quiche-like flavor, while others included sausage or ham, making it heartier. It was perfect for breakfast, brunch, or alongside a roast. Savory bread custard was especially popular in frugal households where nothing went to waste. Every crumb had value, and this dish turned scraps into something elegant and nourishing. Though it has largely disappeared from modern cookbooks, its core concept lives on in modern strata and breakfast casseroles. But the original remains a timeless, rustic comfort food worth bringing back. 28. Stuffed celery with cheese and pimento. In the mid-20th century, no holiday relish tray or cocktail party was complete without stuffed celery. This simple yet iconic side dish featured celery stalks cut into 3-inch pieces and filled with a mixture of cream cheese, chopped pimentos, chives, or blue cheese. Sometimes cottage cheese or olives were added for variety. Stuffed celery was the epitome of cold appetizers in the 1950s and 60s. It required no cooking, was easy to prepare in bulk, and brought both color and crunch to the table. It was particularly favored by hostesses because it looked fancy with minimal effort and could be made hours ahead of time. Its fall from favor began as food trends leaned toward more exotic and less processed dishes. Cream cheese fillings became associated with retro or dated cooking, and the classic celery stick was edged out by more modern hors d'oeuvres. Yet this forgotten favorite still holds up. It's crunchy, creamy, salty, and totally snackable. And it represents a time when food was practical, flavorful, and made with a little extra flair. 29. Cabbage and apple slaw. Before creamy coleslaws became the norm, early American tables featured lighter versions like cabbage and apple slaw. This refreshing side dish combined shredded green or red cabbage with thin slices of tart apples, all dressed in a light vinegar-based dressing rather than mayonnaise. Sometimes raisins, caraway seeds, or mustard were added, and the slaw was chilled to allow the flavors to melt. It was especially popular in German American and Pennsylvania Dutch communities, where both cabbage and apples were seasonal staples that stored well into the winter months. Cabbage and apple slaw was served alongside roast pork, sausages, or even chicken. The sweetness of the apple balanced the sharpness of the vinegar and the crunch of the cabbage, creating a contrast of textures and flavors that was both rustic and refined. Though this version of slaw is overshadowed by the creamy kind today, it remains a testament to the clean, bright flavors that once dominated American farm kitchens. And it's a fantastic, lighter option that deserves a place at the modern table. 30. Hominy with butter and herbs. Hominy, whole-dried corn kernels treated with lye or lime, was a foundational food for Native Americans and early American settlers. Though it's still used in dishes like pozole or grits, one of its most underrated preparations was simply serving it warm with butter and fresh herbs. In this forgotten side dish, cooked hominy was gently tossed with melted butter, salt, pepper, and chopped herbs such as parsley, sage, or thyme. It was often served alongside roasted meats or stews as a hearty, starchy component, something between a vegetable and a grain. The texture of hominy is unique, chewy, slightly puffy, and incredibly satisfying. Its neutral flavor made it a perfect carrier for herbs and seasoning, and it was especially beloved in the southern US, where hominy was cheap, filling, and easy to prepare. Over time, as quick-cooking side dishes and box starches took over, hominy in this simple form was largely forgotten. But its comfort, warmth, and historical significance make it a timeless classic that's more than worth reviving.